When he died, I think the general reaction from most people was, you know, half of them said revolutionary hero, many others said ruthless dictator. Is the truth somewhere in the middle?
Well, he was from the moment he got power in Cuba in 1959, America was trying to undermine him. They organised assassination attempts. They eventually invaded the island but were defeated. And in that sort of situation, a democracy doesn't really flourish. During the Second World War, we abandoned elections, we introduced censorship. Anyone supporting Hitler was sent to prison. And so it was almost like a continuous Cold War of real intensity. And that, I think, prevented Cuba developing into a more liberal regime. And also the trade embargo, huge damage, still carrying on today. The best thing that America could have done was to accept Castro as the leader of Cuba, deal with him, begin trading, and I hope that's what will now happen, though Trump's rather bellicose statement gives you a bit of worry.
Political prisoners were held in forced labour camps. How can you argue that that person is a hero?
Well, I've been to Cuba many times. What I always found, this was a relaxed and open society.
There are no Cubans inside Cuba tweeting about how disgusting Fidel Castro was. And I would say to you, Ken, if he was such a hero, why did 20% of all Cubans leave the country? If it was such a great place with good education and good healthcare, why were they all fleeing? And why was nobody trying to get in there?
Well, when Castro came to power, all those people working for the mafia or involved with America fled to Florida. They weren't there as things suddenly improved. There was another wave of people left when the trade embargo that America had imposed. He could avoid the worst of that because the Soviet Union provided him with support. When the Soviet Union collapsed and that was cut off, then it was another very difficult period of time. But the reality is these things happen because America wouldn't accept the right of the Cuban people to run their own country in their own way. And I think that is the tragedy. We would have had a much more liberal and open society in Cuba if it hadn't been under constant threat of military invasion or how many hundred assassination attempts organised by the Americans?
That people support Fidel Castro and what the brutality that he carried out in Cuba because he stood up to the Americans. And as a result, you just seem to overlook the awfulness that he perpetrated against his own people.
Well, so I've been there. I never saw that. I mean, a lot of wonderful propaganda.
What you see as a visitor is obviously going to be very different from what people are experiencing who live there and who try to stand up to him.
Well, people who stood up to him, yeah, if they were collaborating with America to try and overthrow his government, he would put them in prison. But I have to say, when I was in Cuba, you don't see police massive patrols everywhere. You don't see something like you had in the old Soviet Union. There were open and relaxed people mixing and mingling with the British tourists that were there, and they would say what they thought.
OK. Ken,
final question, Ken. Tell me the worst things about Fidel Castro.
The worst thing is that he, I think, should have ignored a lot of what America was doing to undermine him and moved towards a more liberal democracy. But I can understand why he didn't. I mean, how many times... I mean, if you spent your life facing assassination attempts, you might take a different view of the world.